Though Victor has
Okay.
Victor is a bit busy this morning, so maybe I don't know that he's going to join us. I'll
I'll
just text
start
him.
in time Parashat Korach. Okay, Parashat Korach is a sophisticated parasha because we're talking about the second year, and definitely after the sin of the spies comes even more serious sin. And the top of the page, you see the page, yes, in orange. Okay, he took, and it's not exactly what he took,
Right,
but
there's
it
no
means that he gathered, and most of the explanations are that he gathered together and he decided to have a coalition of all kinds of different groups. And I can talk about 4 different groups. We mainly will talk about 2 different groups, but I can say that actually there are 4 because you've got here On Ben Pellet that disappears later, and he probably says that everybody is holy and nobody has to be a leader. So he's not criticizing properly, not Moshe and not Aaron, and that's why he's not considered a big sinner. And that's perhaps why his wife saved him. We won't go into the midrash, but he disappears. The second part is Anashim Ibnei Israel 50 u-200, and mostly they must be from Reuven, because they are the chosen ones, or they should have been chosen ones. They feel that they haven't been chosen because they're the first in Ibnei Israel, and they're not exactly chosen. The next ones are Bnei Levi. Later we'll see that there's Bnei Levi, and of course Datan Ba'aviram, which are the worst, and we'll see why they're the worst. But I won't go into all the 4. We'll talk about the 2 different groups. I wrote here on the left here that there's 2 main groups that are rebelling against Moshe and Aaron, and we'll soon go into details. And if you look, if I go down in the page, the rebellions they're carrying on until verse number 19. And you'll see why I've written down verse number 19. Vayakel alehem Korach et kol ha'ida, and he gathered all the congregation, which is not exactly a simple congregation, El Petach Ol Moed, to the entrance of the tabernacle, Vayera Kvod Hashem El Ha'eda. Now you'll see that this part, Vayera, this 5, 6 words, is in the middle between the next part. Between this part and the next part, God appears, and you'll soon see why I put it in the middle. Then starts a second part of the parasha, which is, of course, the punishments of the 2. I said there's more, but there's 2 main groups, and the punishments start from verse number 20. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe. Hashem is talking to Moshe and to Aaron, and he tells them, "Hibadlu mitoch ha'eda azot." Run away and keep away from this congregation, and I'm going to kill everybody. In one moment, we don't know exactly what it means, a moment, because there's no proper moment, but it means instantly I'm going to destroy the whole congregation. And Moshe and Aaron don't understand, and they fall on their faces and say, Hashem, you're going to kill everybody because there's a small group that is rebelling against you? And here I want to say something interesting that happens over and over again in the Torah. What happens is when somebody is mistaken, and Hashem will soon mend what he was mistaken, why is it written? Who cares? Okay, so there was a mistake. Okay, it doesn't tell anybody anything. And why again Hashem is saying, no, you're mistaken. I'm not talking about the whole congregation. I'm only talking about the 250 and Korach, let's say something like 300 people, but not the whole congregation. So why is it written? Why is this mistaken written? Here I'm going to give you the answer. The answer is because at the bottom of the page, and have a look at the bottom of the page, we'll get soon to the light blue, but have a look in the pink. In the middle of the thing, Hashem says, I'm going to tell you to keep away from this congregation. And Moshe Aaron says, God, please don't kill everybody. Only 300 people are sinning. Have a look now at the bottom of the page in the same color, pink. What happens is, after the punishment, and we know there was a terrible punishment for this small congregation, the 300 rebellions, two different, we'll talk about it soon, two different terrible punishments. One is from fire, one is from opening the earth and devouring them and swallowing them. But a day later, we come to the next continuation of the story. Here, it's the next chapter already. The next chapter, we're talking about the two chapters here. We're talking about chapter 17. Chapter 17, verse number 6. Vayalonu kol adat bnei Israel mimochorat. Always in all these sins, by the way, always, we got the next day. And the next day is usually worse than the first day. And here I'm going to show you something amazing, that the second day is even worse than the first day. It happens, by the way, in the sin of the calf. It happens last week, what we read about the sin of the spies, but here is also next day. What happened the next day? Verse number 6. Next day, they come to Moshe Aaron and they criticize Moshe Aaron. You have killed Atem amitem et am Hashem. How terrible in the congregation. Now it's the big congregation. Whose congregation? Because the small congregation of the 300 guys, they were already killed yesterday. And here, a day later, comes the rest of the people of Am Yisrael, the whole big congregation. We're talking about the 600,000, or we're talking about perhaps 2 or 3 million, and they come and complain, you have killed Am Hashem, you've killed these holy guys. What do you mean they're holy? They're rebellions. Now have a look at exactly the same words that I put in the middle of the page in pink, again appears here in pink. Vayibi kahel ha'edah al Moshe, and all the congregation gathered together on Moshe. By the way, I wrote it also before. I showed you also vayakel. Can you see the word in the chapter before in verse number 19? Vayakel alehem Korach et kol ha'edah el petach ol moed. Korach gathered in all the congregation to Moshe Aaron. Again here, after Korach died, here you've got Vayihi b'kahel ha'edah al Moshe. All the congregation are gathering together on Moshe and Aaron. Vayifnu el oel moed vehine kisa anan, and the tabernacle was covered with a cloud. Hashem's glory came down, and here Hashem is saying nearly the same words that he said the day before. Vehine kisa anan vayera kvod Hashem, and God's glory came down. וידבר השם אל משה לאמור הרומו מתוך העדה הזאת ואכלה אותם כרגע.
Well, it's a different verb.
To kill the whole congregation, so keep away from them. But we know these words. These words were written when? Yesterday, in front of the 300.
Right,
Moshe,
except it's hibadlu.
Again?
Hibadlu velo heromu.
Okay, here it's written Hebrew. Before it was written hibadlu, keep away. That means keep away from them. Here is certain very close to it. Heromu. That means keep away also. I won't go now to the big difference between the two words. Hibadlu and here's heromu, but you can see exactly the same words appear. Heromu mitoch ha'edah azot, and I'm going to kill them. That means what Hashem said to Moshe yesterday, and Moshe was mistaken, he wasn't very much mistaken. Because what happened was, when there's a mistake, it means you might be right. And that's why the Torah is writing it. And what it means is, actually, Hashem is very angry with the whole big congregation, not only with the 300 guys, 250, and Datan Vaviram, and we'll add on Korach and the Bnei Levi. So let's say something like 300. No, Hashem is not only angry with the 300. Hashem is actually angry with all Bnei Israel. And in the second day, you can see that that's exactly what Hashem says. Keep away from all Bnei Israel. Baruch Hashem. We've got Moshe that is so, he's so looking for justice, and he's really praying, and he found a way also to keep away and to only kill the ones who were terrible. And actually, he managed to save most of Am Yisrael. But here you can see, that's why I say a mistake that was written in the Torah in the first chapter is not a mistake. It's actually trying to give you an insight what's going to happen the next day. And this happens over and over again many times in the Torah. When it looks like a mistake, it's not a mistake. Hashem actually was already angry on the first day. But he said, I will give a chance to Am Yisrael. I'll only kill the terrible guys, the 300 guys. But the next day, actually, Hashem is angry with everybody. And the only way was to save. This time, the second day, wasn't with a prayer. Here, prayer won't help. Here, what happened was there was a magefa. There was definitely a disease. We don't know how many people were killed in this disease. And the only way was to save with the k'torot, with the incense that Aaron was walking around. So that's interesting of itself, that I don't see many commentators talking about it. I saw one commentator, this commentator, mentioning it, but I didn't see anybody really showing that the same words are written on the first day, the same words on the second day, and that's what I said, that it's not a mistake. The Torah writes it, so you should know that at the end of the story, that's really Hashem was angry with all. Okay, the second thing that I wanted to say on this page before we go is the first two. I said there's two groups. That one was more terrible and one was less terrible. And here I'll go back to the beginning of the page and say who were the most terrible of this rebellion. Of course, Korach, Ben Yitzhar, and Datan v'Aviram bnei Eliyav. And I wrote them in dark, in black, and with an orange. And with the light orange, I wrote the second group, which were also rebellion, but not as fierce. They were actually more lenient. They wanted actually to be close to Hashem, and they said, why only Moshe and Aaron are close to Hashem? We also want to be part of Hashem's closeness. We also want to be like Kohanim, and we want to be really something special. And so that's what's written in the second line, and I wrote it in a lighter color with orange. האנשים מבני ישראל 50 ו200 נשיאי עדה. They were the leaders of all the congregation. כלי מועד אנשי שם. I won't go into the whole explanation, but you understand that these were actually chosen people, and they were actually, and they had some kind of job, but they wanted also to be not only political chosen, but they also wanted to be holy. We know that from the whole history over and over again, also with Jews, also with non-Jews, people who are politicians or kings or princes also want to be the holy people like the Pope. And we always have wars in the Middle Ages, enormous amount of wars between kings against popes. Okay, so that's talking about the Goyim. It's the same also with Am Yisrael. We've got, for instance, the king Uzziyahu, that he was at the beginning a righteous king, but afterwards he was terrible. because he wanted to come and become not only a king, he said, I wanted also to be a Kohen Gadol, the main priest, and he wanted to go in the Ktoret. And later Hashem punished him and he had leprosy on his forehead and he was thrown out. And by the way, there were many Kohanim killed there. I won't go into the whole story. But again, you can see that somebody who's a politician or a leader wants also to be a holy and has two crowns. He doesn't only want to be the politician, he also wants to be the holy person. But these people meant well. How do I know they meant well? Because these two groups have got different punishments. What is the different punishments? The first group that I wrote in dark orange with the black, they are punished severely with the opening and of the earth, and they were devoured by the earth. And by the way, they didn't have any graves. When somebody is eaten up by the earth, you know, okay, they were killed, but at least you have some kind of cemetery. No, there's no cemetery. They disappeared. You can't find anything. They just went down, and that's what's written here. Vatibaka adama, the earth opened up its mouth. Vatiftacha haaretz et pia, it was like a big earthquake that the earth opened its mouth. Vativla otam et batehem, and ate everything that they had with them. And that's a terrible, I would say, if a punishment, it's a terrible punishment. The second group had a much lenient punishment. I don't say it's a nice punishment. They died, but at least they didn't die from coming down in the earth. They had something, I would say, heavenly, something more spiritually. And of course, later we'll see who else had this spiritual death. Not exactly a beautiful death, but a fire came from the heaven and ate them. And by the way, when it's written here in verse number 35, it's written that they ate them. Ve'esh yatz'a me'et Hashem, and a fire came down from heaven, from Hashem. Vatochal otam, and they ate the 250 guys. But at least we know one thing: they weren't burnt completely, because soon we'll see in the next page that they got the same punishment like who? Two Kohanim that died on the the beginning when the tabernacle was being
Right.
what's the word again?
Dedicated. You could say dedicated.
Of the tabernacle, two Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu. Burnt literally. Why we know they're not burnt literally? Because their cousins came and schlepped them out, pushed them out with their clothes. If they would be burnt, so also the clothes would have been burnt. But you can see that they were burnt, which means the spirit died. Okay, they went up to heaven, but the body was still there. You can still carry out the clothes. Exactly the same we'll see about these 250. What I say is that these two groups, the first group is more fierce, they got a bigger punishment. The second group was, let's say, a more holy cult, and they wanted only to come towards Hashem and be holy. Okay, they didn't do the right thing because they still rebelled against Aharon, but even so, because their want was actually to be more holy, because of that, they also were killed in a holy way, let's say like that. Okay, so this is one a page I wanted to show, which resembles the first day, the second day, and the differences between the first cult and the second cult. Okay, if anybody wants to say anything, Avi or Elaine, if you want to say something, please, you can say something. I'm going to the next page.
Okay, go ahead. I'm just looking at. Go ahead.
Okay, say. You're just looking where?
So I'm looking at chapter 17, verse 5. So Zikaron livnei Yisrael laman asher lo yikrav ish zar asher lo mizera Aharon hu lahaktir ketoret.
Yes.
So
Okay, we're soon talking about the Ktoret. Not everybody can handle something which is so holy, and definitely the Ktoret, the incense, is such a dangerous thing. It's like any fire which is dangerous. Definitely, this kind of fire is even worse than any other fire. Don't deal with a fire that comes from Hashem. It's even worse. Okay, so not everybody can deal with it. Only holy people like Aaron. Okay, you're right. The ones who wanted to deal with it, of course, I just mentioned, were the two sons of Aaron, and they were so enthusiastic on the coronation of the tabernacle that they run in and they brought their fire, and we know what happened. You are bringing the fire, you are burnt also. But again, spiritually, actually, I don't know if they was a cemetery, but at least they were known and were considered holy people, and they are considered righteous people. Okay, I'm going to the second page, and here I'm going to show that Moshe answers to the two groups. At the beginning, he thought all the groups are saying the right thing. I mean, they're rebelling, but at least they are enthusiastic of being more holy. So Moshe actually says to them something nice. Later, he understands that they are terrible, and then he says to them, no, I'm going to make you be punished. But at the beginning, he's a bit more tame. He's a bit more, he's not so jealous, and he says, okay, if you want to be holy, let's see what he says. So at the beginning, they're all rebelling against Moshe and Aaron, and in the purple here, or the pink, I don't know which color you call it, in verse number 3, ויקהלו על משה ועל אהרון ויאמר עליהם ויאמרו עליהם רב לכם. You have got too many jobs. You and Moshe and Aaron are brothers, and you took on yourself too much. רב לכם. Why do I use the word רב לכם? Because later, Moshe will answer exactly with the same words, Rav Lachem. He'll answer in the same manner. You use the word Rav Lachem. You thought it's too much for taking too many jobs. Also, Moshe says, you are taking yourself too much of a rebellion. Again, they said at the beginning in verse number 3, Ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim, all the congregation are holy. Everybody heard Hashem speaking to Am Yisrael, at least the first two commandments. We talked about it. Not all the 10 commandments they heard. They heard at least the first two. We talked about it a few weeks ago. And comes Korach and all his congregation say, everybody's holy. We are all prophets. Why you, Moshe and Aaron, think yourself more holy and more prophets? Everybody's holy here. Everybody heard Hashem speaking on Har Sinai. So that's what they're saying. Ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim. Comes Moshe and uses exactly the same verse or the same phrase and say, no, not everybody's kadosh. They are more holy and less holy. Here he says later in purple in verse number 7, והיה איש אשר יבחר השם הוא הקדוש. No, not everybody is holy. You are all holy, but even so, you need a leader to lead the whole congregation. It's impossible that everybody is holy. Somebody has to lead it, and Hashem will choose the holy of the holies. By the way, later, and we talked about it already once, that Aaron has on his head like a crown. And what's written, by the way, on top of that crown in the gold, what's written?
Kodesh LaHashem.
Kodesh LaHashem, exactly. And I think that must have been the 8th piece of garment. It's not exactly a garment, but it's one of the 8 clothes. I think that 8th cloth is probably being given only now after Korach. Because I've already talked about it in the book of Exodus, that the number 7 sounds more, it should have been 7 clothes, because always the number 7 is more holy. How come there's an 8th cloth? And I think the 8th cloth is after this rebellion. After this rebellion, man says, you have 7 clothes, but I'm going to write on your forehead, it's not exactly on the forehead, but on the gold plate, it's written Kodesh LaHashem because of this, because it's written here Kulam Kedoshim. No, Hashem is choosing who's the more Kadosh. So you can see that Moshe is using the same manner. Even so, he says to them in verse number 8, Vayomer Moshe el Korach Shimuna bnei Levi, you're already holy because you are from the Leviim and you are the chosen tribe. Even so, he doesn't involve them to compete against Aaron. He says, listen, take the incense and perhaps also Hashem will choose you. And Moshe is, in these verses 8, 9, and 10, is trying to say to them, you know what, perhaps you're right. Perhaps you also want to be holy. So not only Aaron will be a priest, perhaps you will be also a priest, which means that he's giving them a possibility of choosing and doing the right thing, and like praying, so use the incense, and perhaps Hashem won't kill you. Perhaps he'll choose you also. Why do I say this is lenient? Because later Moshe is very angry, because after he hears the other cult, and we talked about 2 different cults, and the more fierce cult is Datan v'Aviram, and we'll soon see what they say. Then he says, no, you are going to compete against Aaron. It's either Aaron or you are going to be holy. And have a look what he says there in verse number 17. Everybody takes an incense with his hands, and you'll put the fire and the incense. ויקרבתם פני השם איש מחתתו 50 ו200 מחתות, 250 instances, ואתה ואהרון איש מחתתו. That means you are competing against Aaron. Before he didn't say that, which means Hashem now will choose, it's either Aaron or you, 250. If you're more righteous, he'll choose you and he won't choose any more Aaron. But of course, we know that Hashem chose Aaron, which means he's now Moshe very angry and he's suspicious that they are really rebelling. How do I know that now he's more angry? Because in verse 8, Vayomer Moshe, and you see it's written here, he starts to talk, and later he talks again. Why does he talk again? Because he realizes that they're really rebelling terribly. And what's in the middle is the passage of Datan v'Aviram. These terrible 2 guys, which resemble the worst of the rebellions. Look what the first word in red, and look what the last words in red. They start a whole neum. What's a neum?
Speech.
A speech, a very short speech, which is only 2 verses, but they start, first of all, we're not joining, we're not coming up. Vayomru lo na'ale. Now that's terrible. Moshe is like a king, he's a hero, and he's definitely an important figure. How do you go and rebel and say, we are not coming to you? If a king calls you, at least give him a respect and come up to him. And I'll just say that in verse 12, these 2 guys didn't even approach Moshe and Aaron in the middle of the tabernacle. They stayed in their tents. Vaishlach Moshe, and Moshe sent to them to call the Datan v'Aviram, and he had to call them in where their tents were, which was at least 1 kilometer away. And they said, we're not coming. The last words, they say again, we're not coming, which means we are not even acknowledging you. You are so, we are undermining you completely. We're not even approaching you. Now have a look what is in the middle in green that they repeat themselves twice. Something so ridiculous and so chutzpahdik. Now look what's written here in Hebrew. You've taken us out from a land of honey and flowing honey and milk. On what do they call the land of flowing milk and honey? You took us out from
Egypt. This is it, using it for Egypt.
On Egypt, that's the most
Right.
big thing, because Hashem was the first one who uses already in the burning bush, and he's repeated it 2 or 3 times later. I'm going to bring you into the flowing land of honey and thing, which is talking about Eretz Israel. And they're using the same verse and the same phrase on Mitzrayim. That's the most chutzpahdik thing. That is a chutzpah against not only Moshe and Aaron, against Hashem. You took us out from Egypt, which is a land of flowing milk and honey. How dare they say such a thing? By the way, the same green is also at the end of what they say. And they say, Af lo el eretz zavat chalav udvash habiyotanu. And you're not even bringing us into a land of honey and milk, which means they are carrying on the sin of last week. It's not last week, but it's half a year ago. But it means it's the sin of what we read last week, or what we read on Shabbat, the sin of the spies. The spies ridiculed and says, this country is not good enough. And they're saying, first of all, if there's honey and milk, there's in Egypt, and you're not bringing us into a land of honey and milk, that means there's they're contradicting completely what Hashem is saying. And the worst thing is in blue in the middle. Ki tistarer aleinu gam yistarer. The word sar, which means minister. You are minister on top of us? Wow. These words, by the way, where do you know? There were 2 guys in Egypt that were fighting, and Moshe is asking them, why are you fighting? And they come to Moshe and say to him, who are you, a minister over us? You remember those 2 guys? Right. Those 2 guys, by the way, afterwards telltaled on Moshe and went to Pharaoh to call him in and to be killed. And Moshe, because of that, had to run away from Egypt and run to Midian. So how do Chazal know that those 2 guys already in Egypt are Datan v'Aviram? Because they are using the same words. Ki tistarer aleinu gam yistarer. Who are you being a minister over us? But they use the same words already there in Egypt 2 years ago when they were in Egypt. That's why Chazal managed to pinpoint and find out those are the same 2 guys which shouldn't have come out of Egypt. They came out of Egypt.
Back okay. That's Shmot Bet, and it says Vayomer mi samcha leish sar v'shofet aleinu.
Okay, very similar to this.
Oh, yeah.
V'shofet. Who are you, a judge? Who are you, a minister? And here the same words are nearly here. Ki tistarer aleinu gam yistarer. So Chazal saw the compatible words here and there. They recognize it's the same guys, same terrible guys, and they shouldn't have left Mitzrayim, and they're that same. After Moshe hearing this speech, he understood that they are not only wanting to become more holy. He became more cautious and says, you are going to be punished. You're going to compete against Aaron. That's what I said before. Okay, 2 more things that are 2 or 3 more things, short things that I'm going to show you in this parasha, which really show how terrible this sin was. One thing is that I haven't seen, I saw Rashi using it only once, and the word Mishkan Korach. The word Mishkan, we all know, is only on the tabernacle. Suddenly here appears a tabernacle of Korach, which doesn't sound very good, which means he's building an opposition place, and he's building a house in opposition to the tabernacle, which means, wow, Korach is really behaving as if he's competing against the tabernacle. There's a tabernacle? No, I'm going to build my tabernacle. I've got my way. Now we understand all the terrible midrashim. And there's all kinds of midrashim, but now you understand why the midrashim, the stories of Chazal saying against Moshe and Aaron, listen, a coat that is completely made from blue, Does it need the tzitzit? It doesn't mean the tzitzit. They were ridiculing all kinds of things. Why? How did the Chazal appear? They understood it from the word Mishkan Korach. He built his own Beit Midrash. How would you say that in English? Beit Midrash. His own university. I don't know.
Yeah,
Again?
or academy.
Academy. That's the word. He's building his own academy, which means academy, which is opposition to Hashem. That's one terrible thing that you can't see anywhere else in the whole Torah. If the word Mishkan will always apply either to the tent of Moshe, when he was angry and the sin of the calf, so he moved his tent out of Am Yisrael and went outside, but that was the academy of Hashem, Moshe, or the tabernacle itself. Another terrible word is one more time in the whole Tanakh written the word Patzta ha'adama et pia uvala otam. Where do we know exactly these words? That the earth has opened its mouth to devour them. I wrote it on the left. Bereshit, chapter 4, which is talking about Cain is asking Hashem,
That's dumb, right?
Terrible. What?
It's just blood, right?
No, it's not talking about the flood. It's talking about before the flood. It's
No,
written
blood, dumb.
But blood would be, of course. It's meaning you not only killed your brother, you also tried to hide the blood of your brother and tried to pour it over the earth, and the earth is actually it's sinking. The blood is sinking in the earth, and it's disappeared there. So that's why Hashem was more angry with Cain. You not only killed him, you also tried to cover. So I say here one more time in the whole Tanakh is written this same phrase. Perhaps it means that these terrible rebellions, Korach and his 300 guys, 250, and the rest of the people are like murderers. They are considered so terrible, like murderers. I haven't found any other better explanation, but there's definitely symbolizing that they are worse like killers, and that's why they were killed. Okay, one more thing that I'm going to say, and we'll finish with that. We talked about that the two groups that rebelled against Moshe and Aaron, one was more harsh. We talked about Datan, Aviram, and Korach, and they really wanted to get rid of Moshe and Aaron, and they thought, who are you and what kind of ministers you are? We should get rid of you, like many other rebellions in the whole Tanakh. But the second group, which are more lenient, they were the 250 guys perhaps wanted to become more holy. And we said they are very close in their sin, like the two sons of Aaron. How do I know? In purple, I showed all the verses and all the words which are exactly identical what's written in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 10. There it's written, Ve'esh yatz'a me'et Hashem, and the fire came out from God, from heaven, and burned them. It's exactly the same words written there also about Nadav Avihu. And the word sreifa is also burning. And then I can show another proof that definitely they are considered, let's say, sinners, but they are holy sinners. Why do I call them holy sinners? Because like Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, which are considered people which are holy, they died, they sinned, but even so we remember them very much. We even remind them, we read about them on Yom Kippurim, which is the holiest day. Here also there's something amazing. These 250 guys used an incense and
You're frozen.
On some kind of saucepans. What do you call them? Machtot. Machtot is
incense pans. Incense burners, incense pans, you would say.
Okay. These pans if they were so sinning, should have been demolished and should have been thrown away in the fire. But here you can see, what are they used for? Hashem says, take these pans and make them as a covering of the altar, which means that it's another layer on top of the altar, and actually it's becoming holy. Now, if these 250 guys were so terrible guys, how come you take their incense or their pans and use it for good deeds? It should have been thrown away. It should have been buried. It should have been burnt or rubbed into dust. But here you can see is written in verse number 8, Zikaron livnei Israel. It will be a memory for Am Israel. Lo ikrab ish zar asher lo mizera Aaron hu. And you take these pans, and the verse before is written in verse number 4. It's verse number 5. I'm sorry. Verse number 4 is written: take this copper, burn it up, and make it as a covering to the mizbeach, to the altar, which means that actually they sinned, but it's a good lesson for everybody to see the altar and remember why it's got another covering, so they'll remember not to rebel. But even so, you can see it's still a covering for the altar. It wouldn't have been a covering for the altar if these guys were as wicked as Datan v'Aviram. So I think, so you can see that definitely there's a lot of learning and seeing the difference between the two big groups. I said there's 4 groups, but at least the 2 big groups here are showing you that there is a difference in their punishment. There's a difference in their ways of attitude against Moshe and Aaron. The first one was worse. The second one was less worse, and that's why they were remembered as better people like Datan v'Aviram. I'll just say one more sentence. And you can see that in the 3rd page, how is Hashem written the whole time? Yud Kei Vav Kei, not Elokim. Hashem, 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 Hashem. And I always show this, that Hashem doesn't use the word Elokim, because even so, Hashem was lenient with Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael again rebelled against Hashem. Even so, Hashem is using 2 words and showing them that actually he's giving them a lot of kavod, using the word Hashem and not Elokim, which means more fierce and more like a judge. And the second word in yellow is Eidah, Eidah. You are still a holy congregation. I know you sinned, but even so, I'll kill the terrible ones, the ones who were saved, went into Eretz Yisrael. So you can see that really this congregation sinned, but even so, Hashem is lenient with them, and Hashem is ready to have them as a congregation. We hope today that we won't sin like those terrible guys. Okay, Avi, if you got anything to say, Elaine, please say if you need anything to say.
So I'm just thinking about, I'm looking at chapter 18, and I'm thinking about what's the function of chapter 18. So chapter 18 details the rewards for the Levites. In other words, like what they're getting paid to do their job.
Which means that actually Korach was right. He should have been important, but not as a Kohen, but as a Levi. Now it's written that these Leviim are really important. Later, Korach should have been the head of the chorus. Tizmoret. What's Tizmoret in English?
Orchestra.
Orchestra. He should have been the head of the orchestra. And David made his 3 sons, Asaph, Heman, and Yedutun, the 3 guys, which there's a lot of psalms on their names, that they were the head of the orchestra. If Korach would have been more righteous, he would say, yes, I am important, but I'm not being the Kohen Gadol, only being a Levi Gadol. By the way, the Levi Gadol is a phrase that the Zohar uses. Korach should have been a Levi Gadol. We've never heard of a Levi Gadol. We know what's a Kohen Gadol. What's a Levi Gadol? Levi Gadol, which means he's the head of the orchestra, and he should have been the head of in Beit HaMikdash. He should have been the orchestra. He didn't understand, and he went away. So that's why it's written the next chapter to say the Levi'im are still important. Even the descent, they were still important.
Right.
Okay. Lehitrot.
Okay.
Thank you very much. להתראות כל טוב.
Shavua Tov.
Lehitrot.